Did your family have favorites? If so, were you the favorite or someone else?
I wish I could tell you I was surprised when my mother smiled at me across the table at Easter lunch and, in that warm voice she saves for announcements that bruise, said, "You'll never be the star of this family like your sister." But the truth is I felt something closer to recognition than shock, the familiar click of a lock I have known since I was a kid, the one that makes me stand very still and breathe through my nose and pretend it is no big deal because pretending keeps the room from turning on me, and because, in this family, the price of speaking up has always been higher for me than for anyone else. I did what I always do in the moment, which is nothing that looks dramatic, nothing that would make anyone later say I overreacted, nothing that would give my mother the pleasure of calling me sensitive. I just stood up, gathered the plates with the same polite nod I use when someone suggests I am difficult, and I carried the cake out from the kitchen like a waitress who has learned not to flinch when customers snap their fingers, all while my sister laughed that soft laugh of hers that means she is happy to be loved, but does not want to look like she is gloating, and my father stared at his hands as if they were doing something important, and a couple of relatives made those awkward comments about how everybody brings something special to the table, which is the kind of thing people say when they do not want to be on the wrong side of a mother who can make a room very cold without raising her voice. If you have never been the child who gets the comparison treatment, let me explain how it feels without dressing it up, because I am not here to make it pretty or dramatic, I am here to make it plain. It is like you are on a team where the coach keeps announcing that you are not the star player, not because you missed the shot, but because the other player's jersey looks better on camera, and no matter how hard you practice, the scoreboard has been preloaded with points for someone else, and after enough seasons, you learn to stop arguing with the scoreboard because the argument only makes you sound bitter while the star is collecting trophies and hugs. So I cut the cake, I passed the plates, I made the small jokes that keep the peace, and I watched my mother beam at my sister the way people beam at a charity that has their name on it. And I let the slice she gave me sit there because my appetite had gone to stand out on the porch and catch its breath, and I kept thinking how neat and tidy her sentence was, how efficient, how it boiled years of tiny jabs into one clean line she could later dismiss as a joke if anyone called her out, and I remember thinking that if she had rehearsed it she would not have delivered it any differently, because she knew exactly where to place the smile, exactly how light to make it sound, exactly how to make my objection look like ingratitude. Here is the part one do not usually admit, even to myself. I have played along for a long time, not because I am weak, but because I picked up early that, in our family, peace is a performance and my mother directs the show. And if I do not hit my marks then the rest of the cast gets uncomfortable, and they start improvising lines like, "She did not mean it," and "You know how she is," and "Let's not ruin a holiday." And I end up apologizing for messing up the scene just to get out of the room without more damage, and yet, as I stood at the sink after lunch rinsing plates while the others drifted into the living room, something simple and stubborn pushed up in me like a hand on a table saying enough. Not loud, not public, just firm. And I knew I was done donating my dignity to keep the production running on schedule. It is funny how a line can be the thing that breaks the rope, not because it is new but because you suddenly decide it is the last one, and, while I was drying the good plates my mother never lets anyone else touch, I thought about all the years I had been the reliable one, the one who shows up, the one who remembers who cannot have nuts, the one who stays late to clean, the one who sends the thank you note, the one who does the family paperwork no one else wants, the one who gets called when something breaks because I will fix it quietly. And I thought about how, for all that, the headline never changes, the spotlight never moves, the praise never glances sideways. And in that moment I realized I did not need a speech or a meltdown or a dramatic exit, I needed a plan. Now, I am not going to claim I mapped out some perfect strategy right there with a dish towel in my hand, but I will say that once you decide you are done playing the part written for you, you start seeing props you never noticed. Little threads that have been dangling in plain sight while everyone was busy clapping for the same person again and again, and you start tugging, and you realize the whole curtain is stitched together with stories and favors and half-truths that only work as long as nobody pulls on them, and I am very good at tugging gently in the right place. I went home with my smile intact and my spine set. I poured myself a glass of water, and I sat at my kitchen table and made a quiet list in my head, not of grievances, because I am not interested in turning into a walking complaint, but of leverage. Which sounds cold, and maybe it is, but it is also honest, because families run on leverage whether we admit it or not, and as I looked at that imaginary list I realized I had more than I thought, not because I had been collecting dirt, but because I had been paying attention while everyone assumed I was too busy washing dishes to notice. There is a special kind of calm that comes when you understand you do not need to yell to be heard. You just need to be precise, and I decided that I would not rush, I would not push, I would simply start with one careful move. The kind that looks like kindness from the outside and feels like truth on the inside, because when you have been told you will never be the star, the sweetest revenge is not stealing the spotlight, it is moving the lights so everyone sees the stage as it really is. I did not text the group that night. I did not call anyone to vent. I let the quiet do some work, because quiet makes people listen to their own thoughts. And in this family, the loudest stories live inside my mother's head, where she edits memories into a version that keeps her on top, and I wanted the silence to make her hear the parts she usually drowns out, the little doubts that nibble when the house is finally still. And then, almost exactly when I expected it, as I was lying in bed with my phone face down, it buzzed with my sister's name, and her voice came in tight and careful, saying that our mother had been in tears all day and would not say why, and could I please tell her what I had done. When Sarah asked what I had done, I let the question hang between us the way you leave a pot to simmer so the flavors mix and the heat does some work for you, and I told her, in a calm voice that made her edgy, because calm from me means I am not playing anyone's part but my own, that I had not done anything loud or mean or dramatic. I had just decided I was done donating my time and my silence to a story that kept paying the same favorite and billing me for it, and if that made Mom cry then, maybe the story had finally met an edit it could not control. She started into the usual script about Mom's age and stress and how holidays can bring up feelings, and I listened, because I know that script by heart and I respect that she finds comfort in it, but when she paused to ask again what, specifically, I had done, I told her the truth that sounds small until you see where it leads, which is that I opened my laptop, I pulled together the records I keep out of habit because I am the one who pays attention, and I built a simple ledger that shows who covers what in this family, not as a weapon but as a mirror. Because I am tired of hearing I bring nothing special to the table when the table does not set itself and the bills do not pay themselves and the favors that keep people comfortable do not float down from the sky. It would be easy to tell you I make lists because I'm a control freak, but the real reason is practical and a little sad. When you spend years being told you are difficult, you learn to document your kindness so it cannot be rewritten later, so yes. I had the canceled checks from when Mom called me late one night and said the insurance mess was going to swallow her whole if someone did not get on the phone right now, and I had the transfer receipts from when Sarah needed a cushion because a job change didn't time out right, but the lease still wanted its money and no one needed to know except me, and I had the emails where Mom thanked me privately and then, at the next family dinner, said how proud she was that Sarah always shows up. And maybe a stronger person would toss the papers and move on. But I am not stronger in that way. I am meticulous, and this time meticulous turned out to be a kind of power. So I made the ledger clean and clear, no commentary, no arrows, no snide notes, just dates and amounts and short lines like pharmacy pickup reimbursed by me, and plumber paid by me pending split that never came, and gift on Mom's birthday purchased by me on behalf of group, and, because I am not trying to humiliate anyone, I sent it with a message to the family group that said I had decided to stop managing the invisible labor quietly and that going forward I'd like us to split costs fairly and assign actual responsibilities with names attached so that the same person is not the default for everything, and I added that if we all agree this is fair, we can start fresh next month, no back charges, no drama. Just a new way of doing this so no one feels taken for granted. You could almost hear the room we were not in together, the way a group chat makes a soundless pause that still feels loud because the ledger did not scream, but it did something worse for people who rely on soft focus. It added up. And when numbers add up, they tell a story no one can laugh off as sensitivity, which is why within a few minutes my aunt wrote that this made sense, and she had wondered for a long time how things got handled, and my cousin asked how to help with rides for mom's appointments since he works near her, and then there was the part you could predict without being a psychic, which is that mom sent a private message asking why I was trying to embarrass her, followed by another that said she never asked me to do any of this, followed by the line that always shows up like a bad smell, that she would have helped me more if I had been sweeter about things, while Sarah wrote in the group that we should keep negativity offline, which is a nice way of saying please do not publish the difference between my image and my effort. I did not argue, because the ledger had already done the speaking, and I have learned that arguing gives people a chance to twist your words into a new excuse. So I kept it simple and said I was happy to hand off tasks and I would no longer be paying for anything up front unless we had agreed in writing to split it, and I added a sign-up list for the next few months of very normal things like appointment scheduling, pharmacy pickups, home maintenance calls, and holiday prep duties, each with a name-attached line where anyone could put themselves, which made the group go quiet in that way where you know people are staring at their screens and weighing what they can no longer pretend not to see. That would have been enough for a lot of people, but I have spent too many holidays smiling while being told I will never be the star at my own table, so I added one more line that looked harmless, but was the point I wanted on record, which said that, separate from tasks and costs, there was a debt we never talk about because it is not financial, it is historical, and it has to do with the college fund that existed for me until it did not, and that I would like clarity on where that money went. Because it was always presented as a family promise, not a discretionary gift, and if we are going to be fair now then we should also be honest about back then. The typing bubbles did their dance and then vanished, and then my phone rang with my father's name, and when I answered he cleared his throat and said we should talk privately because there are things I do not know and he cannot keep them straight anymore. And before I could decide whether to be angry or relieved, he said the words that turned the air into something heavy and careful, that Mom had moved the fund years ago to help Sarah with a down payment, and that he went along because he thought I would understand how timing works, and that he is not proud of it, but he is tired of carrying it. And while he was still talking, my screen lit up with a new message from Mom in the group saying we were all being unfair and that I was trying to punish her for loving my sister. And my sister sent me a private text that said if I kept this up I would destroy our family and she would never forgive me. I did not raise my voice, I did not write a speech, I did not perform anything for anyone. I just replied to my father that we would meet tomorrow, and that I wanted copies of any paperwork he had. And I posted one final message in the group that said I was stepping back from the invisible work effective now, and that I would bring documentation to our next family dinner so we could decide how to make things right, and then, because revenge does not always look like a slam of a door, sometimes it looks like the clean click of a boundary, I removed my card from the autopay accounts. I canceled the monthly delivery service I had set up for Mom that everyone assumed came from nowhere. And I assigned the next 2 weeks of tasks to Sarah by tagging her name beside them with a polite note that said she could swap with anyone if needed, and I went to bed with my phone on silent, knowing that the quiet was going to be very loud for the people who had never heard it before, and that tomorrow's meeting with my father was going to open a drawer that should have been opened years ago. My father does not talk about hard things unless the words are already burning a hole in his pocket, so when he called and asked to meet, I knew he was done carrying something he should have put down a long time ago. And I drove over ready to hear the version that starts with excuses and ends with me being asked to be understanding, but what happened was stranger and, in a way, simpler. Because he opened a drawer he never opens when I am there, and set down a thin stack of papers that did not look like much until I read the headings and felt that steady feeling you get when the picture you have been told for years does not line up with the picture that is actually on the film. And you realize there is not going to be any going back to pretending you did not see it. There was a letter from my grandmother that used plain language about a fund for education for both granddaughters to be used in equal measure, or, if one chose not to use it, to be held for her next meaningful step so that neither would be left behind. And next to it there were transfer slips that showed the fund had taken a quiet turn into an account my mother controlled solely, followed by a cashier's check issued the same week my sister made an offer on her house, and there was an email from the mortgage officer with a subject line that used the word gift in that careful way lenders do, attaching a signed letter from my parents stating that the funds were a gift to Sarah with no expectation of repayment. And there was one more page where my mother wrote a friendly note to a relative saying she worried about me because I had always been the type to chase causes instead of stability, and that she hoped I would not be upset when I learned that timing had made it necessary to help Sarah now and help me later when I settled down. I did not shout, because this did not need volume, it needed clarity, and I told my father that I did not call him because I wanted a confession or a fight. I called because I am done living in a house where the story moves the facts around like furniture. And if we are going to keep being a family, we are going to set the furniture where it actually belongs, which means naming what happened without the cushions of good intentions, and then deciding what we are going to do about it in a way that does not require me to swallow it and smile to keep birthdays friendly. He kept his eyes on the papers and said he had told himself for years that I would understand, that I was strong, that I would bounce, and I said that strength is not the same thing as not needing fairness, and bouncing is not the same thing as never being dropped. And that I could forgive bad timing, but I could not keep financing a lie with my silence and my labor, and if he wanted me to keep showing up then he needed to stop acting like I should accept whatever arrangement kept the peace around my mother while my life quietly absorbed the cost. I took photos of everything because I have learned not to trust that documents remain accessible when people get scared, and I told him I was going to put together a plain packet with 3 pieces only: the letter from Grandma because it mattered, the transfer record because it proved action, and the lender gift letter because it framed the decision in the most honest way, and then I was going to send that packet to Sarah and Mom with 2 options that were not threats but choices, because I am not interested in cornering anyone. I am interested in accountability that you can point to later when the story tries to warp again. The options were not complicated, and I wrote them out in words that were as clean as a recipe, because when you have spent years hearing that you misheard or overreacted, you learn that clean writing is an armor and a kindness. The first option said that Sarah would set up a repayment plan into a new account in my name equal to the amount taken from the fund plus a modest adjustment for the years that money would have been working for me, with payments small enough to be doable and a timeline long enough to be humane, and that once the plan was in place we would not speak of the past again because the plan itself is the apology and the repair. The second option said that, if repayment was not possible or did not fit Sarah's current life, she would grant me a small percentage of title in her house equivalent to the down payment share, recorded properly so that when the property grows, my share does too, and that I would accept that share in lieu of repayment and in recognition of the truth that my future was used to seed someone else's present. You can call that cold if you want, but I have listened to enough warm speeches that left me holding the bill, and I am done confusing warmth with fairness, so I emailed the packet to Sarah and Mom with a brief note that said I love them, that I was not asking for a courtroom, that I was asking for a correction, and that if they chose neither option then I would assume they had chosen to let the larger family see the packet at our next dinner, where we would ask for their opinions on how to make it right, and I added that I would bring printed copies for anyone who preferred paper because, as we have established, paper outlives spin. Sending that email felt like pulling a ripcord I had worn for years without believing it would ever work, and the first reply came fast and hot from my mother telling me I was cruel and transactional, and that families do not invoice each other, followed by another that said I was trying to humiliate her after all she had sacrificed, followed by one more where she asked if I had considered how this would look to the cousins, because appearances have always been the altar where the truth goes to be trimmed. And then Sarah replied, not in the group but to me alone, saying she never asked for the fund, that she thought the help was from our parents, not from me, that she was sorry about the misunderstanding but could not commit to any repayment without talking to her husband, and that, in any case, bringing this out in public would ruin Mom. I took a deep breath and wrote back the line that changed the ground under our feet, which was that this was not a misunderstanding. This was a choice that took from me and gave to her while I was told I would understand. and that grown people make repairs when they benefit from choices that hurt someone else, and that I had presented options precisely to avoid public mess. But if secrecy is the hill they want to defend, then they will have to defend it in front of people who remember grandma's words and who know the difference between fairness and theater. And then I did the thing that made my mother realize the old choreography was finished. I shared a read-only link to the sign-up sheet for Mom's Care tasks with Sarah's name locked beside the next month of responsibilities, and a note that said the schedule would only change once we had a signed plan on the fund, because until then the person who received the cushion would also carry the cushion's weight. That was the first revenge people do not recognize as revenge until it moves their furniture, because it did not shout or shame. It simply made the benefits and burdens line up, and an hour later my phone lit up with Sarah calling and then calling again. And then a short message that said we needed to talk before Sunday and that I was being impossible, and while I watched the dots appear and vanish, my email chimed with a reply from the mortgage officer who, without breaking any rules, confirmed that the gift letter stated the source as grandparental educational savings, language my mother had clearly chosen to keep it pretty while making sure the bank had what it needed, and I knew that when we walked into that dinner with copies, there would be no more pretending this was about my sensitivity, which is why, when the doorbell rang and I saw my mother standing there, I did not open it to start the late-night scene she wanted. I texted through the door that we would speak on Sunday, with everyone present and the papers on the table, and I let her knock twice more before the hallway went quiet, and the quiet finally belonged to me. By the time Sunday rolled around, I had done the boring work that always looks like overkill until it is the only thing keeping the story from sliding back into the old groove, which meant I printed the 3 documents that mattered and clipped them to a simple one-page agenda that said we would stick to facts first and feelings second, because facts are the floor and feelings are the furniture, and I am done watching people nail couches to the ceiling and call it a house. And I also packed 2 plain envelopes that I labeled in thick marker so no one could pretend they did not understand what they were choosing. One that held a short repayment plan with automatic transfers and a timeline that would not crush anyone, and one that held a simple recorded interest agreement in the house that matched the down payment share and adjusted over time the way property does. And I told myself I was not there to win an argument, I was there to stop underwriting one. I called my father that morning and told him I needed him to show up as a participant and not a spectator because I could not carry his discomfort for him anymore, and he said he would. And I believed him because his voice had that sober sound it gets when he is tired of hearing himself defend something he cannot respect. And then I sent a short message to the family group that dinner was at my place because I wanted the table and the printer and the quiet in the hall on my side, and I added a sentence that said there would be no surprises and no raised voices, and if anyone wanted to leave early they were free to go, which sounds polite until you have lived in our family long enough to know that giving people an exit removes their favorite threat. Because when someone cannot say they were trapped, they actually have to decide. Sarah texted separately to warn me that Mom had barely slept and that this was killing her, which is the kind of line that used to fold me in half, because I have always been the responder and the fixer and the one who hates to see people suffer. But I read it this time like a statement of weather, noted it, and replied that the agenda would keep everyone safe from drama and that the documents were straightforward, and she wrote back that I was being cold and legalistic and that families do not need paperwork. And I told her that families who do not need paperwork are families that do not rewrite history, and that I would be thrilled to burn every page once actions matched words for a year, which she did not like. Because what she wanted was the old me who could be nudged into offering water and then blamed for the flood. I spent the last hour before they arrived doing one more thing I knew would be called manipulative by anyone who needs the dark to continue, which was I called my Aunt Ruth, the one who still thinks Grandma's words mean something practical and not just sentimental. And I told her I needed her to come by for coffee near the end of dinner because I wanted someone in the room who remembered the fund correctly and who would not get lost in Mom's fog, and she said she still had a photo of the original letter on her phone and would bring the hard copy Grandma mailed her for safekeeping, and I said that would help keep us all honest, and she said she would be there and not say a word unless spoken to. which is exactly the kind of steady I needed in a room that has been trained for years to look at my mother's face and decide the truth based on it. They came on time because my mother believes punctuality is evidence of goodness, and we sat down and I poured water and I did not make a speech. I just slid the 3 clipped pages to the middle and asked my father to read the first paragraph out loud so that no one could accuse me of performing, and he did, his voice shaking only a little. And he read Grandma's clear line about equal use or equal reserve and the intent that neither granddaughter would be left behind, and then I watched my mother try the first move, which was to say she remembered it differently, and I said that was fine. Memories bend, and that is why we keep papers, and I held up the transfer slip and the gift letter, and she tried the next move. Which was to say I had always been the one who did not want help because help meant strings, and I answered that I had wanted the same help everyone else got, the kind that is a bridge and not a leash, and that we were done with stories that made my boundaries the reason I was denied a foundation. Sarah asked me what I wanted in a tone that hoped I would say something small enough to pay off with a nice dinner and a fresh group photo, and I pointed to the envelopes and said I wanted them to choose one without 12 more hours of spinning. And I explained each option in plain language, not because I thought they did not understand, but because I wanted to hear the words laid out where they could not hide behind misunderstanding, and when I finished my mother went quiet the way she does when the script is not working and she has not yet chosen the next one, and my father stared at his hands, and Sarah's jaw did the thing it does when she is deciding whether to be a partner or a child. And for the first time I saw that she understood what it meant to receive something that had a name on it that was not hers. Then came the part one had prepared for but still felt like someone snapping a rubber band at my skin, because my mother went for the family nuclear option. The tearful line about how I was humiliating her and that she had done what she had to do because I was always chasing causes and did not prioritize my future the way Sarah did. And that any reasonable parent would pick the child who was ready to build a life now over the child who wanted to figure herself out and, before the old instinct could make me defend my character like I was on trial, I said I was not interested in relitigating my personality. I was interested in correcting a documented transfer that used my name and my grandmother's intent, and that this had nothing to do with who I am and everything to do with what was done, and I slid the envelopes out so they had to touch them to move them away, because sometimes the body knows what the mind is trying to dodge. Sarah asked for time, and I said of course, but time would not mean silence, and time would not mean I keep carrying the costs and the errands while everyone processes. And to make sure no one confused delay with safety, I opened my laptop and shared the screen to show the sign-up list with her name on the next month, and I said that stayed until we had a signed plan. And if we chose the title interest, then I would move the tasks back to a fair split, and if we chose the repayment plan, then I would step back completely from Mom's logistics for a season so Sarah could feel the weight and I could feel the relief. And I said it just like that because I wanted the sentence to land the way a gavel lands when a judge is tired of speeches. My father surprised me then by clearing his throat and saying he would sign a letter acknowledging the transfer and supporting either option, and that he would also start a small monthly transfer to me until the plan kicked in because he was done watching me subsidize the piece like a utility bill that no one else sees. And my mother snapped his name in that warning tone that has kept him quiet for most of my life, and he did not look at her. He looked at me, and I saw that maybe the ground could change under someone else's feet too, and I felt something unclench in my chest that had been clenched for years. We were exactly at the point where delays usually sneak in dressed as compassion when the doorbell rang, and before my mother could tell me not to answer, I did. And my aunt stepped in with a small folder and said she was sorry to intrude, but she had what she thought we might need, and she put the original letter on the table with Grandma's handwriting as plain as ever, and my mother opened her mouth to start a fresh round of, "Not now," and I said now is exactly when, and I slid the second envelope toward Sarah, and she reached for it with a look that said she had decided one thing while her mother had decided another, and just as her fingers touched the flap, my mother pulled the envelope back and said no one was signing anything tonight. At the exact second my father said he was signing something tonight, and before anyone could choose which sentence to follow, my phone buzzed with a new email from the mortgage officer with a subject line that made my stomach go very still. Because it said documentation request regarding source of funds and potential corrective affidavit, and I looked up and said, very calmly, that we might not be the only people who wanted the record corrected. And the room finally understood that the window for pretending had closed. I woke up Monday morning to a dozen missed calls from my mother, a string of texts from Sarah that ranged from begging me to pause before everything breaks to accusing me of trying to ruin her marriage, and 3 new voicemails from my father, who sounded older in his voice than I had ever heard him sound. And before I even finished my first cup of coffee, the phone rang again with a number I did not recognize, which turned out to be the mortgage officer's assistant explaining in a neutral tone that their compliance department had flagged the source of funds after a routine audit, and they needed clarification from my parents within a week, which meant that the paperwork I had unearthed and the line I had drawn had not just ripped through the family story, but had accidentally wandered into the world of systems where stories bend less easily. And the silence I felt on the other end of that call told me the old tricks would not work there. I did not call anyone back right away, because rushing has never helped me in this family, and because I wanted the weight of waiting to sit where it belonged, so I went about my workday and let the phone light up without answering. And by the time I returned home, there was an email from Sarah's husband written in stiff language about unnecessary escalation and family matters being kept in family, which made me laugh in a bitter way because it confirmed exactly what I had been saying. That? For years I had been told to keep things in the family only when keeping meant burying them, and now that the ground had shifted, suddenly privacy was sacred, and I decided then that my revenge was not going to be loud or messy or cruel. It was going to be the same thing I had been denied all along, which is structural fairness that cannot be erased with a sigh or a smile. When Sunday came around again, the family gathered at my table for what everyone assumed would be another round of negotiations and pleadings, but I had already decided there would be no more rounds, only resolution. And I placed the 2 envelopes back on the table with a 3rd document on top, this one drafted by a lawyer friend who had owed me a favor, and it was a clean, 2-page memorandum of understanding that formalized either repayment or title interest, signed by all parties, witnessed by a notary, and filed properly so that there could be no backpedaling. And when my mother started to object, I interrupted her for the first time in my adult life and said, "This is not a debate anymore, it is a choice. And if neither choice is made today, then the 3rd choice is simply that the packet gets shared with the compliance department that already asked questions, and the rest will play out without me lifting another finger." The room went so quiet I could hear the clock in the kitchen that usually fades into background noise, and Sarah looked at me with a mix of fury and calculation. The kind of look someone gives when they realize they are cornered, but not in a way that can be blamed on violence or cruelty, only on truth, and she finally asked what would happen if she signed, if I would hold it over her forever. And I told her plainly that I would not, because the whole point of having paper is that memory does not need to carry the weight anymore. And I think in that moment she understood that signing was not submission but release, and slowly, without looking at my mother, she picked up a pen and wrote her name on the 2nd option, the one that gave me recorded interest in her house, and she pushed the paper back across the table with a finality that landed harder than any shout. My mother erupted then, saying Sarah had betrayed her, that I had poisoned the family, that this would kill her, but my father did something I had never seen him do in all the years of tension and compromise. He stood up, put his hand on the paper, and said, "This is done," and for the first time the hierarchy that had ruled our house shifted with a visible crack, and I realized that my revenge had not been a dramatic reveal or a humiliating scene. It had been the steady removal of all the cushions under the story until it collapsed under its own false weight. In the days that followed, the fallout was predictable but also strangely quiet. My mother retreated into a sulking silence that she tried to frame as grief. Sarah oscillated between coldness and strained politeness. My father started calling me more often in a way that felt like he was trying to make up for lost years, and the larger family, once they inevitably heard pieces of the story, treated me with a kind of careful respect that said they knew more than they let on and that they were not going to test my willingness to put things in writing. The real victory, though, came not in their reactions, but in the way my own life began to feel lighter, because I no longer felt like a permanent understudy in my own family's drama, and I no longer carried the invisible work that had been expected of me. And I no longer swallowed the humiliation disguised as jokes, because I had forced the truth into daylight where it could not be packed away, and I had claimed my share of what was mine without screaming or begging, only by refusing to play the role that had been written for me. So when Sarah called a week later and said Mom had been in tears all day and would not say why, I did not rush to soothe her or defend myself or explain. I simply said, maybe it's time she thought about why, and then, for the first time in my life, I ended the call without waiting for her permission to hang up, and I sat in the quiet of my own house with the satisfaction of knowing that the star my mother said I would never be was not the one on her stage. It was the one I had claimed for myself, and no one could take it back.